What if the man everyone mocked, the one they called a loser, was the only person who could save them all? What if the janitor cleaning up their filth was secretly the most dangerous man they would ever meet? Kalen pushed his mop across the gleaming marble floor of the Sterling Tower lobby, the rhythmic slosh of water in the bucket a familiar, numbing sound. His reflection was a ghost in the polished surface, a tired man in a gray jumpsuit, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and a grief that never fully faded. He was invisible, a fixture of the background, and that's how he preferred it. The mockery was just noise, a constant hum he had learned to tune out. Brent Clarkson, a senior executive with a jawline as sharp as his insults, strode past, deliberately scuffing his expensive Italian leather shoes on the freshly mopped floor. "Watch it, scrub," he sneered, not breaking stride. "Some of us have important work to do. Can't be slipping on your poverty puddle." A few of Brent's sycophantic junior associates snickered behind him. Kalen's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He just dipped the mop back into the bucket and erased the smudges. Arguing was a waste of energy he needed for his son, Rowan. The thought of his 7-year-old boy was the anchor that kept him steady in this storm of daily humiliation. Rowan, with his bright, curious eyes and a smile that could melt glaciers, was the only reason he endured this. For him, Kalen would be invisible. He would be a ghost. He would be whatever it took to keep him safe. From across the lobby, Isla Vance, the building's office manager, watched the exchange. Her brow furrowed with a familiar mix of anger and pity. She hated how Brent treated the staff, especially Kalen. There was a quiet dignity about the janitor, a stillness that didn't fit the worn-out uniform. She saw the way his calloused hands expertly handled his tools, the precise economy of his movements. He never complained, never rose to the bait. He just did his job with a focus that was almost unnerving. Today, Brent seemed particularly cruel. He stopped at the reception desk, speaking loudly enough for Kalen to hear. "Honestly, I don't know why we employ these dregs. A single dad, isn't he? Probably can't even afford to feed his kid properly." It's pathetic. Kalen's shoulders stiffened. The insult to himself was one thing, but bringing Rowan into it ignited a cold fire in his gut. He gripped the mop handle tighter, his knuckles turning white. He felt Isla's eyes on him and forced himself to relax, to let the anger flow through him and away. He had a promise to keep. A promise made to his dying wife, whispered in a sterile hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and finality. Keep him safe, Kalen. Just be a dad. And so he was. He mopped the floors. He took the insults. He was just a dad. Later that evening, the city lights painted streaks across the window of their small, cramped apartment. It wasn't much, but Kalen kept it spotlessly clean. Rowan sat at the small kitchen table, meticulously coloring a picture of a superhero who looked suspiciously like his father, albeit with a flowing cape and a much better uniform. "Dad, did Mr. Brent say mean things again today?" Rowan asked, his crayon pausing mid-stroke. Kalen, who was plating their simple dinner of pasta and sauce, managed a tired smile. "Mr. Brent just has a lot on his mind, buddy." "It's not about us, but it is," Rowan insisted, his voice small but firm. "He doesn't see you. He doesn't see that you're the strongest man in the world." Kalen knelt beside his son, his large hand gently covering Rowan's. The boy's unwavering faith was both a comfort and a sharp, painful reminder of the men he used to be. The men he had buried. "I'm strong enough for you," he said softly. And that's all that matters. But as he tucked Rowan into bed that night, reading him a story about a knight who protected his kingdom in secret, Kalen felt the weight of his hidden past pressing down on him. The world he had escaped was a place of shadows and violence, a world where strength was measured in blood and survival. He had traded that life for this one, for safety, for Rowan. Yet, some nights, he wondered if the ghosts of that world would ever truly let him go. The next day, the rain fell in relentless gray sheets, mirroring the bleakness Kalen felt. As his shift ended, he saw Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman from the 5th floor, struggling with 2 heavy grocery bags under a faulty awning. People rushed past her, their faces buried in collars and umbrellas, oblivious. Kalen didn't hesitate. He pulled up the hood of his thin jacket and approached her. "Let me help you with that, Mrs. Gable." She looked up, her face etched with relief. "Oh, Kalen, you're a godsend. These old arms aren't what they used to be." He took the bags, their weight insignificant in his hands, and walked her the 3 blocks to her apartment building. He listened patiently as she talked about her grandchildren and her prize-winning roses, his presence a quiet, reassuring comfort. From her fourth-floor apartment window, Isla watched the scene unfold. She saw the gentle way Kalen held the bags, how he angled his own body to shield the elderly woman from the worst of the downpour. This wasn't the defeated men Brent mocked. This was someone else. Someone kind and strong. Her skepticism, the protective wall she'd built around her heart after a bad breakup, began to crumble just a little. Who was Kalen, really? The question lingered in her mind long after he had disappeared from view. A few nights later, that question would be answered in the most terrifying way imaginable. Isla had worked late, trying to untangle a scheduling mess Brent had created and then blamed on her department. The rain had returned, and the back alley she sometimes used as a shortcut was dark and slick with water, the air thick with the smell of damp refuse. She was halfway through when a large figure stumbled out from behind a dumpster, blocking her path. The stench of cheap whiskey hit her first, followed by the man's leering grin. Well, well. Look what we have here, he slurred, his eyes roaming over her. A pretty little thing, all alone. You're mine tonight. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Isla. She took a step back, her hand fumbling in her purse for her keys, her phone, anything. Leave me alone, she said, her voice trembling but firm. He laughed, a guttural, ugly sound, and lunged, grabbing her arm in a painful grip. She cried out, a sharp scream that was swallowed by the narrow brick walls. But someone had heard. From the mouth of the alley, a figure emerged from the rain-soaked darkness. It was Kalen. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were like chips of ice. Let her go, he said. The voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through the air with absolute authority. The thug turned, sneering. Or what, janitor? You gonna clean me up? He shoved Isla against the wall and advanced on Kalen. I'll deal with you first. What happened next was a blur of motion so fast, so brutally efficient, that Isla could barely process it. Kalen didn't throw a wild punch. He moved with a liquid grace that was terrifyingly precise. As the thug swung a clumsy fist, Kalen sidestepped, his hand shooting out to strike the man's elbow, a sharp crack echoing in the alley. The man screamed as his arm went numb. Before he could recover, Kalen delivered a single, calculated strike to the side of his neck. There was no theatrical flair, just a quiet, decisive impact. The thug's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the wet pavement, completely unconscious. Kalen didn't even glance at the crumpled form. His entire focus was on Isla. He was at her side in an instant, his hands gently checking her for injuries. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice now filled with a deep, resonant concern that made her knees feel weak. The icy stillness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a warmth that was achingly familiar. She could only shake her head, her mind reeling. How did you do that? She stammered, staring at the men on the ground and then back at Kalen. Who are you? He looked away, the janitor's mask slipping back into place. I got lucky. He was drunk. That wasn't luck, Kalen, she insisted, her voice gaining strength. That was something else. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the deep-seated instinct to retreat into the shadows of his anonymous life. But she wouldn't let him. Not now. She took a deep, shaky breath. Let me walk you home, he started to protest, but she held up a hand. Please. I need to know you and your son are safe. The mention of Rowan was the deciding factor. He nodded, a silent concession. They walked in a tense silence, the city sounds muted by the gravity of what had happened. When they reached his apartment, the door opened to reveal a small, warm space filled with the scent of cinnamon and the soft glow of a night light. Rowan was asleep on the couch, a book splayed open on his chest. Kalen gently lifted him, his movements full of a father's love, and carried him to his bedroom. When he returned, Isla was standing by the window, looking at the city lights. My ex was a police officer, she said softly, not turning around. He talked a big game. But he was a bully. He liked feeling powerful by making others feel small. You have real power, Kalen. But you hide it. You let people like Brent walk all over you. Why? He sank onto the worn sofa, the weight of the world on his shoulders. Because power attracts attention. And attention is dangerous. All I want is to keep my son safe, he finally told her, the words spilling out in a quiet torrent. He spoke of his wife, a brilliant journalist who had been killed for getting too close to a story. He spoke of the promise he made to her to leave his old life behind, to disappear and just be a father. He didn't tell her what that life was, but he gave her enough to understand the crushing weight of his secrets. She sat down beside him, her earlier fear replaced by a profound and aching empathy. She saw the man beneath the janitor's uniform, a man forged in fire, who had chosen a life of quiet sacrifice for the sake of love. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. His calloused fingers intertwined with hers. In that simple touch, a connection was forged, a silent understanding that they were both survivors, both searching for a safe harbor in a world that could be relentlessly cruel. Their newfound bond did not go unnoticed. The next day, Brent saw Isla bring Kaylin a coffee, their hands brushing as she passed it to him. He saw the way she smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile he had been trying to elicit for months. The sight filled him with a potent, venomous jealousy. The janitor? The worthless, pathetic single dad. He decided to put Kaylin back in his place. Later that afternoon, as Kaylin was cleaning near Brent's office, the executive strode out, a stack of important-looking files in his hand. He accidentally stumbled, sending the papers flying directly into Kaylin's path. Kaylin, reacting with the instincts he fought so hard to suppress, moved to catch them, but Brent timed it perfectly, kicking the mop bucket over. Soapy water drenched the documents, turning the ink into a blurry mess. "You clumsy idiot!" Brent roared, his voice echoing through the quiet office floor. "These are multi-million-dollar contracts. You've ruined them." Kaylin knew it was a setup, but there was nothing he could do. He stood there, dripping water and humiliation, as a small crowd gathered. "That's it," Brent declared, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You're fired. Get your things and get out of my building. And I'd be careful if I were you. People who cause this much trouble often find that trouble follows them home. It would be a shame if something happened to that little boy of yours." The threat, veiled but unmistakable, hung in the air. The cold fire in Kaylin's gut roared back to life, but this time, it was harder to contain. His gaze met Brent's, and for a fleeting second, the janitor disappeared. Brent saw a flicker of something ancient and lethal in Kaylin's eyes that made him involuntarily take a step back. But the moment passed. Kaylin simply nodded, turned, and walked away, the word "fired" ringing in his ears. The real trouble, however, was just beginning. That night, the Sterling Tower became a prison. Brent's corporate dealings were far shadier than anyone knew. He had been selling proprietary data to a ruthless corporate raider, and the deal had soured. Believing Brent had double-crossed them, a team of 4 armed mercenaries stormed the building after hours to retrieve a data drive Brent had promised them. They were professionals, moving with swift, brutal efficiency. They rounded up the skeleton crew of late-night workers, including Isla, who had stayed to help clean up the mess Brent had made, and Brent himself. They herded them into the main boardroom on the 40th floor. The building went into lockdown. Kaylin, having returned with Rowan to pick up his last paycheck, was caught inside. He had just collected his meager check when the emergency shutters slammed down, plunging the lobby into an eerie twilight. His phone buzzed with a building-wide security alert. He saw the armed men on a security monitor behind the reception desk, dragging a terrified Isla. And his blood ran cold. He pulled Rowan into a small, secure maintenance closet. He looked his son in the eyes, his voice low and urgent. "Rowan, I need you to be a brave soldier for me. You stay in here. You don't make a sound, and you don't open this door for anyone but me. Do you understand?" Rowan, seeing a seriousness in his father he had only ever glimpsed, nodded solemnly. "I love you, Dad, I love you more, buddy." Kaylin closed the door, and as the lock clicked shut, the persona of the weary janitor fell away like a discarded shell. The man who stood in the hallway now was different. His posture straightened, his eyes became sharp, analytical instruments, scanning every angle, every shadow. He was Spectre. A name whispered with fear and reverence in the darkest corners of global intelligence. A ghost who was supposed to be dead. He moved to his janitor's cart, which he had left near the service elevator. He opened a false bottom, revealing not cleaning supplies, but a compact case. Inside was his gear, a silenced pistol, a combat knife, a set of lockpicks, and a lightweight tactical headset. As he geared up, he wasn't thinking about revenge or justice. He was thinking of Isla's terrified face and the promise he'd made to his wife. He was just a dad, protecting his world. He moved through the building's service corridors, a phantom in the machine. He knew every vent, every crawlspace, every blind spot in the security system. He was a predator in his own hunting ground. On the 38th floor, he found the first mercenary guarding the stairwell. Before the men could even register his presence, Kalen was on him, a shadow detaching from the darkness. A swift, silent takedown, and the man was unconscious, stripped of his weapon and comms. Kalen put in the earpiece, listening to the chatter. 4 hostiles. 1 with the hostages, 3 covering approaches. He began to hunt. He used a fire extinguisher to create a diversion in one hallway, drawing the second mercenary away from his post. When the men rounded the corner, Kalen dropped from a ceiling panel above him. The fight was over in seconds. The third he found in the IT server room, attempting to override the lockdown. This one was more alert. He saw Kalen's reflection in a server bank and spun around, raising his rifle. But Kalen was faster. The silenced pistol coughed once. The men dropped, a tranquilizer dart in his neck. 3 down. 1 to go. In the boardroom, the lead mercenary was growing agitated. His team wasn't responding. He pressed the barrel of his gun harder against Isla's temple. Brent was on the floor, weeping and begging. Take anything you want. The drive is in the safe. The code is 8-1-5-9, he blubbered. Shut up, the mercenary yelled, his eyes darting towards the door. Suddenly, the lights in the boardroom flickered and died, plunging them into darkness, save for the emergency lights in the hall. Panic erupted. And then, a voice came from the shadows near the far wall, calm and cold as a winter night. Let her go. The mercenary spun around, dragging Isla with him as a shield. He couldn't see anything in the gloom. Who's there? Show yourself. A figure stepped forward, just enough to be silhouetted by the hallway light. The mercenary's blood ran cold. The silhouette, the posture, the utter lack of fear, he recognized it from intelligence briefings that were supposed to be fiction. No. It can't be, he whispered in disbelief. You're Spectre. You're dead. My name is Kalen, the silhouette replied, the voice devoid of emotion. And this is your last chance. In that moment of shocked hesitation, Kalen moved. He was a blur, covering the 20 feet between them in what felt like a single heartbeat. He disarmed the men with a series of precise, debilitating strikes, spun him around, and neutralized him with a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. He gently guided Isla away from the fray as the main lights flickered back on. The police, alerted by an anonymous signal Kalen had triggered, swarmed the room. It was over. The aftermath was chaos. Brent was arrested, his pathetic attempts to paint himself as a hero falling on deaf ears as his corporate espionage was laid bare. He was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of utter humiliation as he passed Kalen, the loser janitor, who was now surrounded by awestruck police officers and a stern-looking man in a military uniform. The man was General Corrigan, Kalen's former commander. We thought we'd lost you, Spectre, Corrigan said, his voice thick with emotion. The world is a darker place without you. Kalen shook his head, his eyes finding Rowan, who had been brought up by a kind officer and was now running into his arms. He hugged his son tightly, burying his face in his hair. My name is Kalen, he repeated, his voice clear and strong. And my world is right here. He looked over at Isla. Her face was a canvas of shock, relief, and something much deeper. She walked over to him, her eyes shining. You were protecting him all this time, she whispered, understanding everything now. By being invisible, weeks later, the rain had given way to a brilliant, cloudless sky. Kalen, Isla, and Rowan walked through a park, hand in hand. Kalen had accepted a security consulting position offered by the general, a quiet job that used his skills to protect people, but from a safe distance, with no more hiding. He was no longer a ghost. He was a father, a partner, and a hero who had finally come home. They bought ice cream and sat on a bench, watching Rowan chase a frisbee with unrestrained joy. Isla leaned her head on Kalen's shoulder. I guess you're not so invisible anymore, she smiled. He looked at the love in her eyes and the laughter of his son, and felt a peace he thought he had lost forever. No, he said, his voice full of warmth. I'm right where I'm supposed to be, so the next time you see the quiet single dad, the overlooked worker everyone dismisses, maybe take a closer look. Ask yourself, what battles has he fought? What secrets is he protecting? And what incredible power does he hide, waiting for the moment he's needed most?